Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Toggle and Linode. I'm John Voorhees, and with me, of course, is my co-host and Mac Stories partner in crime, Mr. Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John. You make it sound like a criminal activity, where
it is.
In theory it shouldn't be one, but...
No, it shouldn't be one. It feels like that sometimes, though, I think. Federico, we've got another special guest with us this week, and I wanted to do a brief introduction and then just dive right into talking. And today we're joined by Yarrow Cheney. He has played a whole bunch of different roles over his career in all sorts of animated feature films. To just hit a few highlights, Yarrow most recently co-directed The Grinch, which is an animated film that came out over this past holiday season. And he's also co-directed The Secret Life of Pets and was the production designer on both Despicable Me movies, The Lorax, and Curious George. Welcome to the show, Yarrow.
Hi, thank you. Thanks a lot. Great intro. I sound really wonderful.
Well, it's really exciting to have you with us, and we wanted to just dive right in and talk to you a little bit about the creative process of animated filmmaking and how technology and apps and things play a little bit into the process of putting those films together. I guess I'll turn it over to Federico just to kind of kick things off.
Yeah, sure. So App Stories is a show all about apps and the way that we use them and sort of the culture surrounding apps. And so we're very interested, of course, in the role of technology in different industries. And in this case specifically, the role of technology in all the different roles that you played in the films that you worked on over the course of multiple decades. You've been involved in making animated feature films since the 90s. And so I kind of wanted to start by asking you what kind of role technology has played in making those movies over time. How has technology evolved? How has technology changed from your point of view?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, technology for me and for the work that I do, it has become increasingly just a huge part of the way that I work. And then starting all the way back, I went to CalArts. I studied character animation there, and at that point, I was learning how to draw with pencil and paper and animate traditionally with pegs at the bottom of your paper that you would flip, and you would draw a series of drawings and sort of learning that classical style of animation. But at that point, it was already the technology was already there. Animation has always been sort of at the forefront of whatever technology was available. The first animated films were sort of using live action cameras in ways that hadn't been used before, and then the old studios like the Snow White, for instance, was all about it was how did they figure out how to tell a beautiful, compelling story using the technology of the day, and all the way through up until when I started working in the field or studying, hoping to work in the field, it was really like, as the technology changed, at that point we were shooting our pencil test is what you call it. When you're blocking out your scene, you start to test the drawings that you draw frame by frame, or every other frame, or every 4 frames to sort of see if your motion, your acting is working. We used to shoot on these cameras that would record to VHS video cassette. And then, halfway through school, I think we went from recording sound on, for our films on magnetic tape, and we switched over to digital. When I started working in the animation business, the first job out of school, I worked at Turner Feature Animation on a film called Cats Don't Dance, which was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. I was an animator at that point, and learning how to apply what I had learned professionally, or in a professional setting, and learning a lot. But at that point, I was still working traditionally, with pencil and paper. And it wasn't until 2 films later, we did Cats Don't Dance, and then during that film, Turner was acquired by Warner Brothers. We worked on a film called Quest for Camelot, and then right after that, there was I started working on The Iron Giant, and that was the first film that I started. They sort of trained a bunch of us to work on the Giant team, which he was a if you've seen the film, it's a traditionally animated film, but the Giant was a CG character, and so this was way back when Maya was in beta. I remember we started on sort of doing trainings, kind of learning how to work in 3D and, sort of 3D space on soft image. And then Maya was sort of being developed, and we switched over in the middle of training for the film. And then once we started working on the film, once the production started, we animated the giant in Maya. So that was my first introduction to 3D animation. And so that was sort of taking all the animation, that skill set and the knowledge of, at that point I was still very sort of young or green, and I was sort of still trying to learn how to learn the trade and learn, I was trying to be a better actor and better, everything that goes along with animation. But at that point I had to sort of apply it to the 3D animation space rather than the traditional tools that I'd learned to use.
That's really interesting on the Iron Giant. I really enjoyed that movie, and I recall reading about how the robot was done in 3D. Was that a conscious choice, or was that due to like technical constraints? I mean, what was kind of the story behind why that one aspect of the film was done in 3D?
I don't remember exactly. I think I know that I'm sure that it was a conscious choice. My recollection is that it was, he was this other kind of a being. He was this character that came from outer space. He was a rigid weapon, essentially. Like, he didn't know it yet, but he kind of woke up on our planet as this almost naive newborn giant metal person, but he was very different than Earthlings, right? And so there is, I would imagine Brad Bird, the director, was trying to sort of have this character that seemed like he was different, but also we rendered him in a traditional style with lines, and he was painted so that he fit with the style of the film. He looked like a hand-drawn character, but he did have that sort of rigidity when we needed it, that you could really kind of feel his weight, you could feel his structure. And so I think I don't know, because I wasn't at that point, I wasn't in on those conversations, but I think that was probably the thinking behind it.
Sure. So I interrupted you. What? Where did technology evolve from there, from your work on Iron Giant?
Yeah. So at that point, I had I started using these 3D tools, and I really loved them. My wife and I, who we had met at CalArts also, we had gone through school together and worked at the same studios. So we worked at Turner and Warner Brothers together also. After Iron Giant, we started our own like small animation company where we did some, lots of little things like show openings, and that was a great opportunity to kind of mix 3D and 2D, because it was, all of this stuff was starting to become available to kind of the little guy, right? So we ran our company out of my apartment in Santa Monica, and we would hire people for freelance animation or cleanup or different jobs, but we would incorporate 3D elements into our projects, and that was a great learning experience. That allowed us to really kind of, when you're doing little projects with just a few people, it's such a great education, because you have to do everything. Everybody has to kind of chip in and do jobs that they don't usually do. And so we were doing, 3D animation, but also modeling and compositing and integrating 2D and 3D, and like, how do we take this 3D set and animate 2D characters out of it? And we figured out how to, just through trial and error, you animate the set first, and you print out all these frames on paper, and you draw over them and clean them up, color them, and then put them back together, and hopefully everything works. And so that was kind of for us, that was just sort of jumping into the deep end. And because at that point everything was digital, when we with the exception of drawing. So we would draw and we'd do the cleanup animation work, which is essentially you do the way that traditional animation works is the animator does a rough pass at the scene. They do the rough animation and essentially get the acting in there, you animate the scene, but it's still, the lines aren't pretty enough to be colored or to see on screen unless you're going for that kind of a look. And so you do a pass over that where you make everything just pristine and beautiful, and then you color those. But from the cleanup phase on, at that point, everything was was digital. And so from there on, that's most of the work that I've done since has been in the digital space, and using Macs and Cintiqs and the Wacom tablets and things like that as my primary tool. So I guess that's when I really kind of jumped into that, creating artwork and creating content using digital tools. And then from there, I started getting into production design, and most of at that point I was still drawing on paper, scanning, and then painting in the computer. But that with the introduction of a Cintiq, that the drawing process, I started drawing on the screen as well. And so that was from then on. It's pretty much I've been using different hardware and software to do creative work.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Toggle. One of the things that I've found has helped me a lot in staying on track with a project is time tracking. But the linchpin to effective time tracking is that it has to be simple. Otherwise, it becomes a hassle and you just stop. That's where Toggle comes in. It's available on the web, desktop, and mobile, and there's even an API and integrations on iOS with things like Siri and shortcuts. That means that Toggle is always with you wherever and however you work, which is really nice. Of course, all of your time entries are safely saved and synced between your devices, regardless of whether you're on a paid or a free plan. One of my favorite recent additions to Toggle's iOS app is Siri integration. That makes it easy to start timers, including blank ones where you can fill in the details later, or specific ones that you've already created. With Siri, you can also stop timers and access reports, all with your voice. And here's another powerful feature that you might not know about. Toggle integrates with your calendar. You can create entries based on events and receive notifications from the app when it's time to start tracking your next meeting or calendar event. After you've tracked your time for a while, you'll want to check out Toggle's reports too. They're great for spotting trends and understanding how you spend your time. They're super flexible too. You can get daily, weekly, monthly, annual reports and compare with prior periods to help you spot those trends. And don't forget to check out Toggle's iOS app. It's been redesigned and improved. It and all of its features are completely free and have no ads. It's got shortcut support that allows you to do things like add projects and tags to entries. And it's got a suggestions feature to quickly track your most frequent tasks that's getting an update soon that'll make it even smarter. So head on over to toggle.com to learn more and start tracking your time hassle-free wherever you are. Again, that's toggle.com. There'll be a link in the show notes too. Thanks so much to Toggle for supporting the show. It's interesting, especially you mentioned earlier in your career working with small teams and then moving from paper and pens and whatnot to digital. Mm-hmm. One of the things we see a lot is that digital tools have allowed smaller teams to work a lot like bigger teams because they're able to iterate.
Yeah, definitely.
Could you talk a little bit about that and what your experience has been like in terms of how that that sort of technology has been allowed you to leverage small teams and I guess also the bigger teams that you're working on, with films like The Grinch?
Yeah, definitely. I think that iteration as a part of the process, as sort of an organic part of the process, that's such a bigger part of the process now than it was really allowed to be in the past. It used to be if you drew a character on a piece of paper, that piece of paper contained that drawing, and if you wanted to iterate on that, you would, if it was small, you would, maybe throw a piece of paper on top, trace off some of the aspects, but usually you would just do another drawing entirely. You would, and there was a lot more work that went into getting what is in your head down on the paper. And nowadays, it's not just drawing; it's also painting, and probably especially with painting. If you do a color key for a set or a sequence, if you're doing lighting work and trying to explore what does the scene look like, feel like from a lighting perspective, from a colors perspective, you can very quickly try different things using digital tools. You can paint you can paint the scene and have that as a version. And if you want to try some iterations on that, you can save another version and try things very quickly. And so that, I think that's a very big difference between the in the past, where things had to be much more analog, and nowadays where we can try. It gives us the freedom to try different things and try, if we have a creative idea, it's not gonna break the bank to just mock something up and see if it works. So in that way, it's very freeing. As as artists, we're always trying to sort of dig for the better idea, the more emotional idea, or the more, something that, either reveals character or reveals mood. And you don't always get those the first time you put something down. And from my perspective, or my experience rather, it's usually several iterations in that you really kind of start hitting the pay dirt. Your first impressions, the first things that you put down tend to be a little bit more cliche. It's sort of your brain's first attempt at something, saying, oh yeah, it's this character doing this. But then you look at that and you think, oh, but what if he was doing this? What if he was holding this? What if he was interacting with this? What if the more you think about it and try things, the more that you can kind of find things that are a little bit more original and a little bit more, what you're going for.
One thing that I think might be a good example of that, at least based on one of your prior interviews that I read, was in The Grinch, when you were working on Whoville, because Theodore Geisel's book, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, didn't have a lot of guidance in terms of what Whoville looked like.
Yeah.
But I understand from this interview that I saw of you, I think it was on YouTube, that you had to obviously expand on that and create an entire Whoville for the film. How did that kind of play out?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. The what Ted Geisel gives us in the book is no more than 3 houses in one drawing, and they're these beautifully, simply drawn houses that are very charming, and you get the sense that you're sort of seeing maybe the corner of the town or something like that. And so, the process there was to say, okay, let's look at these houses. Cindy Lou's house is in the book. It's maybe the most detailed. It's sort of drawn full size on the page, and so you can pull lots of details. The way that the snow is drawn on the curved shaped roofs, the way that it's constructed, with corner posts on the houses that are presumably wooden slats that connect the corner posts, the rounded windows. The way that the porches go up to a sort of a covered porch with posts, and just lots of little details, and just the overall way that he draws shapes where they're organic, they're not straight, and so you get this very sort of organic, handmade look in this line drawing that Dr. Seuss gave us, and you get a little bit of a sense of, okay, what do these things look like together? These houses look like together, and then for our film, we wanted the Grinch to have, first of all, the Whoville is a very important element in the Grinch. It's a wonderful place full of people that, what we really wanted Whoville to be was a place that you really wanted to be, and filled with people that were genuinely good people that you would love to know. And so we were really trying to, going for appeal and going for just sort of authenticity and all of these wonderful aspects that would sort of highlight Grinch's Grinchiness. So all of these wonderful things that we love, the Grinch hates, and that there's a tension there, and we start wondering, why does he hate this place? Why this place is wonderful? I would like to be here. And then of course we're sort of hopping back and forth between his point of view and enjoying him being Grinchy, enjoying him hating the place and being mean to the people, at the beginning of the film. But there is that sort of question that we're left with, which is, why is this wonderful place cause him such pain? And so the more wonderful we could make this place, the more, and also the fuller, the bigger, the more, like, the deeper we could make it. We wanted it to really feel like a place that isn't just there for Christmas. It's not a town that that is a kitschy, like Christmas marketing scheme. It's a town that full of real people that have a good time with each other. They like singing all year round, and Christmas is the time where everything, all their best, like the town is really kind of comes alive. It highlights the town in the best way. It's sort of the salt that pulls the flavor out of the town. And so in order to do that, we took a look at what the book gave us and all of these, the way that we wanted to portray the town, and then expanded using all of the details and the design aspects that Seuss gave us. We designed it out and made it much bigger. And also there's the element of, that we knew that the movie was going to end up where the Grinch was going to steal Christmas on Christmas Eve. And so the more impossible that was to do, like the more impossible that task, the more the Grinch would have to go above and beyond. And that, reveals character and reveals his ingenuity, and is just so much fun because it gave us that problem. Like, well, this is an impossible place to steal Christmas from. So how would we do that if we were the Grinch? And so and to get back to your what we were talking about, the iteration process, because we're able to iterate, we were able to design. Our director went through and he designed a whole bunch of different houses that we could try different shapes with, and the overall feel of the place. We were able to design and try to find that sort of perfect balance of lots of Christmas decorations, not too much so that it overwhelmed you and made you kind of feel just kind of assaulted. We didn't want to assault people with the decorations. We wanted it to feel just really wonderful.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. With Linode, you'll have access to a suite of powerful hosting options with prices starting at just $5 a month. And you'll be up and running your own virtual server in the Linode cloud in under a minute. Linode features industry-leading performance with native SSD storage, a 40 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They now have 10 data centers spread across the world, meaning you can serve your customers even quicker than before. Linode also has an API that allows you to easily automate tasks or develop custom applications in the cloud. And everything is manageable via the command line. All of Linode's pricing tiers feature hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups and node balancers. We use Linode at Mac Stories to run things like our custom Slack bots that automate our editorial workflow. Okay, I want to talk to you about pricing because Linode has fantastic options here too. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for only $5 a month, and they offer high memory plans starting with 16 gigabytes of RAM. As a listener of this show, you can sign up at linode.com/appstories, and you'll not only be supporting App Stories, but you'll get a $20 credit towards any Linode plan. That's a great deal. On the 1 gigabyte of RAM plan, that's 4 free months. And with a 7-day money-back guarantee, there's nothing to lose. So, go to linode.com/appstories right away to learn more, sign up, and take advantage of that $20 credit. Thanks so much to Linode for supporting the show.
You mentioned this freedom to create and to iterate more quickly.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, from a production perspective, how do you balance that freedom to release new ideas, right, at a faster pace, with the fact that you gotta keep a balance, like a cohesive style, and you have multiple people involved? So how do you maintain that cohesive style in the film and in the production, while also having this crazy freedom to try a bunch of different ideas, across with different tools and with different people? How do you bring it all together under a single style, under a single vision?
Yeah, well, I guess, on this film, I had the opportunity to do a lot of the concept art. It was, most of the film that from a concept point of view was between myself and Colin Stimson, our art director. We were able to kind of do a lot of work without, my, what I always sort of tried to do was keep ahead of production, because of course production, once things are moving, once things, we have sequences going into animation, we have sequences going into layout. You need to make sure that everything's figured out before you animate a sequence, right? Because if you haven't figured it out, if you don't have all the right elements and it's halfway there, you'll have to animate it again. And that is much more expensive than trying things ahead of time with concept art or storyboards or all the stuff that happens before things, it goes out to all the animators and all the layout artists and all the modelers and texture artists. It's like once all these other artists get a hold of it, you don't want them to have to redo work. And so my approach has always been to try to stay ahead of all of that stuff as much as possible. So, I for my concept work, I would kind of lock myself in my office and work on a location or an idea or a sequence, that I was storyboarding before it was actually on the radar of production. And so it allowed me that freedom to iterate and to try things. And that's where my typical workflow when it comes to concept art is I'll just kind of sequester myself away and I'll have a subject like, okay, Whoville. What is Whoville? Who are these people? What do they look like? What does this place look like? What are the interesting things about them, the character quirky aspects of this place? And the tool that I use most of all is for this process is Concepts, the Concepts app on an iPad Pro. And so what I'll do is I'll open Concepts and I'll just start drawing. Trying to come up with ideas, looking at stuff, showing people and kind of bouncing ideas off of other people. But Concepts is great because it's one of the, it's this program with an infinite canvas. And so you can, and it's a vector based, all of the lines are vector, all of the brushstrokes are vector. So you can constantly like move stuff around, you can draw a character, you can draw a location, and then you can, with your finger, just select a part of that character, make it bigger, smaller, move it around, flip it, anything you want to do. And it doesn't degrade the image. And you can, because the canvas is infinite, I can say, okay, this is an idea. And then I copy parts that I like over to the right of it, and I'll try some other stuff, and I can throw reference on the same canvas as much as I want. And so there's just this, that when I'm finished exploring an idea, if you sort of zoomed out, they're just, for every sort of final drawing, there are, several tries and if you were to print it out, it would be a massive piece of paper, that's probably, 50 feet by 50 feet with little drawings everywhere. But it's all part of that sort of iterative creative process that helps me to find those ideas that are worth preserving and showing to other people and seeing what they think and seeing if they're as funny or interesting or emotional as I think they are, and sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. But it's that process that is really valuable. That's really where, for me, the creative work is done. That is something that I try to protect as much as possible. And it's something that, because of these tools, things can go fast enough. You are able to work fast enough to be able to work closer to the speed of the speed at which you are thinking. You know what I mean? And of course, right, you can't always draw as fast as you think. That would be wonderful, but we can get a lot closer to that now than we ever have before.
And I wanted to know, how did you approach using the iPad as one of your primary tools? Was this something that happened years ago? Have you tried different apps, different setups? And also, what are the pros and cons that you've noticed in using the iPad over multiple films, over multiple years of usage?
I've been using the iPad Pro since they came out. But before that, I was always, as an artist, what you're always looking for is to get into that flow state where there's nothing between what's in your head and putting it down on, whether it's paper or digital canvas. And, my tool, the tool that I usually used, for years. Probably most of my career has been Photoshop on a Mac with a Cintiq monitor, and that's a wonderful tool. And those tools have gotten better and better over the years. But there is a way that you are sort of forced to work. It feels a little bit like you're working on a big machine, and it's a wonderful machine, and it allows me to do so much. It allows artists to do so much. But what you're always sort of looking for is like, get the machine out of the way, get the stuff out of the way, and so that you can get that distance between your brain and what's on your canvas. You want that to be shortened as much as possible, so that you don't have stuff in your way. For me, the way that I work, and I think a lot of artists are like this too, those little stressors that get in your way when you're, whether it's the kind of paper with the kind of pencil, or just that lag that you have with a pen to the stroke that you're making on a tablet, or with a stylus, that lag between what your hand is doing and when the computer catches up, the distance between the tip of your pencil or stylus and the pixels that are actually emitting the light. All of those things can sort of just put a little bit more distance between you and your artwork. And so, for me, I think when the iPad came out, I was sort of looking for, you're always sort of looking for closing that gap and finding that, the next tool that will allow you to work a little bit more fluid. And for a while because iPad, I tried to use normal iPads with the big fat styluses that are essentially like fingers. And I started painting with those, but that was sort of taking a little bit of a step backward because, on your Cintiq tablet, you've got a really accurate stylus and a point, whereas it felt like you were just using you were painting with oven mitts with the big dumb styluses. And so I was sort of looking forward to like, hey, it would be so great if the iPad, which I loved and had so many great apps, if they came out with a pencil. I bought a Microsoft Surface tablet, which I really, really liked. And that was a huge step forward. The problem that I found with that was that I didn't feel like the apps were up to sort of the level as the iPad apps. And I ended up just working on, that you could run Photoshop on it. That's great. But Photoshop is meant for, I know they're working on an iPad version now, but it was essentially meant for a desktop, right? And so you have lots of palettes and all kinds of things that work really, really well for a desktop, but they kind of get in the way when you're trying to use your fingers. And so that never became the replacement for the way that I would draw or paint. I would end up going back to my desktop Mac. And so when the iPad came out with the Apple Pencil, that was a huge leap forward, because it meant that I could really use all these new tools, these apps, in a way that was much more intuitive for an artist. The pencil was so accurate, and it was so fast. The apps were so fluid. All of these things and the distance between the tip of your pencil and the pixels, and the pixels were, the Retina display. You weren't aware of the pixels, and so all of these things started getting out of your way, allowing you to kind of get just immersed in your work a little bit more. And so since then, all of these things have gotten even better and better. And so now that's why it's I think that my iPad is my primary tool. So I do most of my work there. And so as I said, I do most of my design work, my iteration work in concepts. And then I'll take, usually you can do color work in concepts also, but usually I'll take the line work into Procreate and do, because my painting style tends to be more sort of, I don't know, like more like paint, I guess. And so I'll take it into Procreate and do a lot of color work there. Sometimes I'll keep things if I'm keeping things a little bit more graphic. Sometimes I'll keep images that I want to take in color and concepts. But I kind of go between several apps, or a handful of apps. Yeah,
that's really interesting. I want to dig in, I guess, a little bit more on concepts and Procreate, because I think I get what you're saying, because nobody's going to confuse me with an artist, but I use Concepts too, as well as some other apps like Linea by the Icon Factory and GoodNotes, which is more of a note-taking app.
Yeah.
And what I like about them on the iPad is that it's reducing the distance in a lot of ways between the idea that's in your head and the thing you're putting it down on. And to me, that's such a great, as someone who spends a lot of his day just sitting at a Mac or an iPad typing, the keyboard is just one step away from that. And it's nice, especially when you're in the process of brainstorming or coming up with ideas, to be able to work with and manipulate them directly. I mean, is that similar to what you found for some of the work you do?
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because the apps that I've always sort of been drawn to, it hasn't always been the ones that like there's some wonderful apps that make your brushstrokes look like watercolor, and the water sort of blends into other strokes that you make, and those are just fantastic, and I've used those for some things. But there are things that when I was using my Surface tablet, I had Photoshop on it. I had several other apps that were painting apps or drawing apps. But what I would do my drawing in was OneNote, the Microsoft note-taking application. And because it had a pen that was, vector-based, it was really fast. And so you could just do lots of, you could iterate. It was sort of a very, very rudimentary version, or it still is a very, very rudimentary version of the way that Concepts works, right? It's vector paths that look like pen, brushstrokes or pen strokes. And so I would find myself using, rather than painting apps, or drawing apps, I would end up using a note-taking app. And I remember even before that, I had a Samsung tablet, because it had a Note. It was the Galaxy Note a long, long time ago. It was a tablet, and again, there were other apps that were painting apps and drawing apps, but I found one that was a note-taking app that I used most of the time. That's the hard part, tying things down. That's a matter of like trying to that's spending the time and making sure that everything looks beautiful and clear and is, but coming up with like, what is that composition? What is this character design? What are, the things that help you come up with what you're going to tie down, what the thing that you were going to sort of take to the final version. That's for me, that's the difficult part. And so yeah, the software that helps you iterate is more useful. I guess the other apps that I use. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I always come back to Concepts. I probably use that 90% of the time, or 80% of the time, and then Procreate. I still do work in Photoshop on my desktop setup, but most of the time I find other apps. I try them out, but I tend to kind of because I do use almost anything that comes out. I try, and I really try to kind of get into, see how it works, and see if it can help me, in any part of my pipeline, my personal process. But yeah, I guess, other things that are sort of on my radar, there are things that I'm really interested in learning. Grease Pencil on the Blender, desktop app is, the things that people are doing with that is 3D application that has the ability to draw vector lines, and that I think has got, but you draw in 3D space. That has a lot of sort of possibility for the things I'd like to do going forward. So that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'm curious, to what degree, stepping back and maybe a little broader for the entire production process for a film, to what degree are you using custom software solutions versus off-the-shelf stuff? Because it sounds like a lot of your process is off-the-shelf apps that you find on the App Store that anybody can use. But when it really comes down to all the animators who are working with you and the production process, to what degree is that customized versus something that just anybody could pick up on the internet?
Right.
Too?
Yeah, it's actually it's kind of a mix, and I would say most of the software that most people use at Illumination, where I've been working for the last 10, 11 years, the different departments use a different mix of off-the-shelf software and proprietary software. So, but I would say probably most of the software is, like art department, for instance, all of it is there's nothing proprietary. It's mostly, in my case, I use apps on iPad and then Photoshop on a Mac, and most of the other artists use Photoshop on Macs. But animation, they use Maya, the 3D animation software that anybody can buy. It's pretty expensive, but it's available to anybody. That said, they have all these special tools that Maya is a very sort of open architecture that is really easy to write plugins for, and so there's lots of customization. At Illumination McGuff, they have their own rendering software that's entirely theirs, which is another, it's one of these things that they are constantly writing new tools for each film, and what the challenges are for each film. For Grinch, there was the challenges of shooting a film that was entirely in a winter landscape, a beautiful natural landscape with snow everywhere. And every single character had fur on them and had to interact with the snow, and the snow had to interact with fur. And then you've got, all of the sort of natural effects, clouds and mist and wind and all of that. And so there was a lot of work customizing the animation tools and the rendering tools and, compositing tools to be able to make a film that could effortlessly, seemingly effortlessly depict a world like that. So you just kind of felt like, what we're trying to do was make the world feel, authentic, so that you felt like, if you were able to walk through it, you could feel the snow crunch. You could feel the wind through your hair or your fur. And so we really wanted that sort of, that's the look of it to appeal to your senses, rather than having it feel too distant through stylization. It was a stylized film, but we also wanted it to feel real. And so lots of proprietary work, software work and development had to go into that for our, rendering. But we also, the compositing is done in Nuke, which is, off the shelf software. And yeah, so I think, for the most part, I would say most of the stuff is that the studio does. It's sort of, most of it is using available software. The core rendering is proprietary, but then through every step, most of the other, through animation effects, all of those different sort of artistic departments, there are tools written specifically for what they need to do.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yarrow, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up for today. I want to thank you so much for joining us, because it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I mean, we don't, Federico and I are writers, and we don't get to talk to someone who does animation and filmmaking very often, and it's been a real fun time talking to you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This has been great. Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having me on.
All right, well, that's it for this show. I want to thank our sponsors again, both Toggle and Linode. And you can find both me and Federico, as always, over at macstories.net. Federico on Twitter is at Viticci, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN, VOORHWS, and Yarrow Cheney. You should follow him on Instagram, because he posts a lot of the cool pictures for the Grinch and other films he's worked for on Instagram, and it's really been a pleasure following him. If you go on Instagram, his username is just Yarrow Cheney. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.